It was a crisp autumn morning in 2005 when Jonathan Hale, a self-made millionaire, was taking a rare stroll through the streets of downtown Chicago. Despite his substantial wealth, Jonathan often found himself walking the city's streets when his mind needed a break from the business meetings, stock market updates, and endless emails that seemed to dominate his life. On this particular morning, the air was cool, and the golden leaves fell from the trees like currency from a shaken wallet. As Jonathan approached an intersection, he noticed a woman sitting on the curb with a small cardboard sign that read, "Please help. God bless." Her clothes were worn, and her hair was tangled, yet there was a certain dignity in the way she held herself. Her eyes, a deep brown, spoke of a lifetime's worth of stories. Moved by an impulse he didn't fully understand, Jonathan reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and handed it to her without a word. The woman looked up at him, her eyes widening in surprise. It wasn't just the amount that stunned her, but also the suddenness of the gesture. She took the money with trembling hands. "Thank you, sir. You don't know what this means to me," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Jonathan offered a nod and walked away. It was just another fleeting act of kindness in his otherwise busy life. Or so he thought. It was a gray November afternoon when Jonathan found himself near Rosewood Cemetery, where he often went to visit his parents' graves. The quietness of the cemetery, the way the rows of headstones seemed to stretch on forever, gave him a strange kind of peace. As he made his way down the winding path, he noticed a familiar figure kneeling beside a weathered tombstone. It was the beggar woman he had given $100 to just a month earlier. Curiosity piqued, Jonathan approached her cautiously. She was placing a small bouquet of fresh flowers at the base of the grave, her fingers lingering on the petals as if she were reluctant to let go. The gravestone was simple, with the inscription, "James Keaton, 1975 to 2000. Beloved son, lost too soon." "I didn't expect to see you here," Jonathan said softly, not wanting to startle her. The woman looked up, surprised to see him, but there was also a hint of recognition in her eyes. "It's you," she murmured. "The kind man from downtown." Jonathan nodded. I come here sometimes. My parents are buried nearby." He gestured vaguely toward the other end of the cemetery. "Was he someone important to you?" The woman gave a bittersweet smile and turned back to the gravestone. "James was my everything," she said. "We were engaged. He died 5 years ago." Jonathan's brows furrowed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." She shrugged, as if it were a simple matter, but her voice betrayed the pain she still carried. "It was a long time ago," she replied, "but some things, you never really get over them." After a moment of silence, Jonathan cleared his throat. "I didn't catch your name before." "Rebecca," she answered. "Rebecca Lawson." "Well, Rebecca," Jonathan said, "I'm sure James was lucky to have you." Rebecca gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "And thank you for what you did for me a month ago. That money, it helped more than you know." Jonathan shrugged, suddenly feeling uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I'm just glad it helped," he replied. He was about to leave when Rebecca spoke again. "Can I tell you something?" she asked hesitantly. "Something I haven't told anyone in a very long time?" Jonathan paused, then nodded. "Of course." Rebecca took a deep breath. "I haven't always been like this," she said, gesturing to her ragged clothes and the worn-out backpack beside her. 5 years ago, I was different. I had a job, a place to live. James and I were planning our wedding. We were happy, you know?" Jonathan listened intently, his gaze never leaving her. "But then, it happened," Rebecca continued, her voice wavering slightly. "James was killed in a car accident. A drunk driver. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. Just like that." She snapped her fingers to emphasize the suddenness of it all. "It broke me," Rebecca admitted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I couldn't work, couldn't sleep. I couldn't even bring myself to stay in our apartment. Everywhere I looked, I saw him, so I left. I thought if I could just get away, maybe the pain wouldn't be so bad. She gave a small, bitter laugh. But you can't outrun grief, can you? No, Jonathan replied softly. You can't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rustling of the leaves and the distant hum of traffic. I'm sorry, Rebecca said finally, her voice barely audible. You didn't come here to hear my sob story. Jonathan shook his head. Don't apologize, he said. I'm glad you told me. He glanced down at the flowers she had placed on the grave. It's good that you still come to visit him. It means you haven't forgotten. Rebecca's lips curved into a faint smile. How could I forget? She murmured. He was the love of my life. Jonathan watched as she rose to her feet, dusting off her worn-out jeans. There was a resilience in her posture, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. As she picked up her backpack, she glanced at him one last time. Thank you again, she said, for stopping to talk. It means more than you know. Jonathan nodded, and with that, Rebecca walked away, leaving him alone by James's grave. He stared at the gravestone for a long time, pondering the way life had brought him and Rebecca together, however briefly. He didn't know if he would see her again, but he hoped she would find her way back to a better life. Jonathan was in his downtown office, seated at his desk, when his assistant buzzed in to let him know that someone was there to see him. She said her name is Rebecca Lawson. His assistant added, Should I send her in? Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. Yes, he replied. Send her in. When Rebecca walked into his office, he almost didn't recognize her. She was clean, her hair neatly styled, and she wore a modest but well-fitted dress. There was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Rebecca, Jonathan said, rising from his chair. You look different. She laughed softly. In a good way, I hope. In the best way, he replied, a smile spreading across his face. What brings you here? Rebecca took a deep breath. I came to thank you, she said, not just for the money, but for talking to me that day at the cemetery. You reminded me that it was okay to keep living, that it was okay to remember James, but also to move forward. Jonathan listened, intrigued. I took that $100, she continued, and used it to get a room at a shelter for a few nights. Then I found a part-time job at a cafe. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I saved every penny I could and found a place to stay. It's not fancy, but it's mine. And I started volunteering at a grief support group. It helps, being around others who understand what it's like. Jonathan's heart swelled with admiration. I'm proud of you, Rebecca. You've come a long way. She smiled, a touch of shyness creeping into her expression. I couldn't have done it without that first bit of kindness, she admitted. I wanted you to know that it made a difference. Jonathan stepped around his desk and extended his hand. Sometimes, all it takes is a little help to get back on your feet, he said. Rebecca shook his hand, and as their fingers touched, there was a shared understanding between them, one that transcended the boundaries of wealth and circumstance. Rebecca's life continued to improve. She worked hard at the cafe, eventually becoming a manager. The pay wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to live on, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose. Her friendship with Jonathan also deepened. Though they came from vastly different worlds, they found common ground in their shared experiences of loss and the search for meaning beyond material wealth. Jonathan began to see Rebecca as more than just the woman he had once given money to. She was a reminder that every person, no matter their situation, carried a story worth listening to. And as Rebecca became more confident in her new life, she began to share more of her dreams with him. She wanted to start a nonprofit that provided job training and support for those who were struggling with homelessness, just as she once had. I know it's ambitious, she told Jonathan one afternoon, as they sat in a small cafe near his office, but I believe it can make a real difference. Jonathan, who had always admired Rebecca's resilience, decided to invest in her idea. He provided the seed money to get the nonprofit off the ground, and with his help, Rebecca was able to hire staff, rent a small office space, and begin offering workshops. Rebecca's nonprofit, New Horizons, became a well-known organization in Chicago. It had helped hundreds of people find jobs and housing, and Rebecca had become a respected figure in the community. She still visited James's grave from time to time, but now her visits were different. She spoke to him of the life she had built, of the people she had helped, and of the unexpected friendship that had changed everything. Jonathan, now a board member of New Horizons, often marveled at how a simple act of kindness had led to such a profound change. Not just in Rebecca's life, but in his own. It had made him more compassionate, more aware of the struggles others faced, and more willing to use his wealth to make a difference. The $100 he had given Rebecca all those years ago had been a small gesture, but the impact of that single moment had rippled outward, changing the lives of many. In the end, it wasn't the money that had mattered most, but the connection between two people whose paths had crossed at just the right time. And so, as Rebecca and Jonathan stood together at the opening of New Horizons' new facility, they shared a quiet smile, knowing that sometimes, even the smallest acts of kindness could set the world on a different path, one person at a time. Another 5 years passed, and New Horizons had grown into a prominent organization in Chicago, providing not only job placement and housing assistance but also educational programs for at-risk youth, counseling services, and a mentorship initiative for those transitioning out of homelessness. Rebecca, now in her early 40s, was widely recognized as the face of the organization, frequently appearing at community events and charity galas, her story inspiring countless people. Jonathan remained actively involved on the board, though his role was more supportive than hands-on. He had seen his friend grow from a struggling woman on the streets into a leader whose compassion and tenacity were transforming lives. For him, this journey was more than just philanthropy, it was a personal awakening. His once business-focused life now had a deeper meaning, shaped by the relationships he had formed through New Horizons. One winter evening, as Rebecca was closing up the nonprofit's downtown office, a man entered, his worn-out coat dusted with snow. He was in his late 30s, with a rugged look and tired eyes, but there was a familiarity in his features that caught Rebecca's attention. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone gentle but cautious. The man hesitated. I wasn't sure if I should come here," he began, his voice raspy. "But I've been hearing about what you're doing, the job training, the support programs. I figured, maybe you could help me." There was something about the way he spoke that made Rebecca pause. She studied his face closely, a memory slowly surfacing. "I'm sorry," she said. "Do I know you?" The man gave a rueful smile. "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you," he said. "My name is Tom Grady. I was the driver in the accident. The one that—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. This was the man who had been behind the wheel of the car that killed James. A heavy silence hung in the air as Rebecca processed Tom's words. A flood of emotions surged through her. Grief, anger, disbelief. She had never imagined she would meet the person responsible for James's death. And yet, here he was, standing before her, seeking help. I don't know what to say," Rebecca managed, her voice trembling. "Why are you here?" Tom's expression was one of deep remorse. "I've spent years trying to live with what I did," he said quietly. "After the accident, I served time for driving under the influence. When I got out, I tried to start over, but it hasn't been easy. I can't hold down a job, and I've struggled with my own demons. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've heard about the work you do. I thought, maybe I could find a way to make things right." Rebecca stared at him, torn between wanting to help and the pain of the past. Part of her wanted to turn him away, to make him suffer for what he had taken from her. But another part, the part that had been rebuilt through her own journey of healing, saw the possibility of redemption, even for someone like him. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally. "But if you're serious about changing your life, we can try to help. You'll have to start at the bottom like everyone else. It's not going to be easy." Tom nodded, relief and gratitude evident in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Tom's arrival stirred up memories that Rebecca had worked hard to cope with. She spoke with Jonathan about it the following day, explaining what had happened. Jonathan listened with a mix of concern and admiration for her willingness to confront such a difficult situation. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" Jonathan asked. "No one would blame you if you didn't want him around." Rebecca sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know if I'm okay with it," she admitted, "but part of me feels like it's the right thing to do. If we're really about helping people turn their lives around, then shouldn't that apply even to someone like him?" Jonathan gave a thoughtful nod. "You're a stronger person than most," he said. "If you think you can handle it, then I support you." Over the next few months, Tom participated in New Horizons programs, starting with the basic life skills workshops and attending addiction counseling. He kept a low profile, avoiding drawing too much attention to himself. Most of the staff and volunteers had no idea of his past connection to Rebecca, and he was determined to earn his place without special treatment. For Rebecca, seeing Tom's efforts and gradual improvement was both challenging and cathartic. There were moments when her emotions would surface, during a particularly moving speech at a support group meeting or when she saw Tom struggling to overcome a setback, but she kept reminding herself of the core mission of New Horizons: to help people rebuild their lives, no matter where they came from. As the years passed, Tom became an active member of New Horizons, eventually finding a role as a peer mentor, helping others who had been affected by addiction and homelessness. He didn't try to hide his past. Instead, he used his story as a way to reach others, to show that change was possible even for those who had made terrible mistakes. Rebecca and Tom's relationship remained complex, with an unspoken understanding of the history that linked them. They weren't friends in the conventional sense, but there was a mutual respect that had formed through their shared commitment to the cause. And while Rebecca still visited James's grave, she found that the heaviness in her heart had lessened over time. One day, as she stood by the gravestone, she spoke aloud to James, as she often did. "I hope you'd be proud of what I've done," she said softly. "I'm still learning to forgive, but I think I'm getting there." Meanwhile, Jonathan's life was undergoing changes of its own. His involvement with New Horizons had ignited a passion for philanthropy, and he began to invest more of his time and resources into social causes. He scaled back his business ventures, delegating more responsibilities to his company's executives, and focused on expanding New Horizons' reach to other cities. Jonathan had always admired Rebecca's courage and dedication, and over time, his feelings for her deepened. However, he never expressed them openly, respecting the friendship they had built and the professional boundaries they maintained. He knew that their bond had started from an act of charity, and he didn't want to jeopardize what they had by introducing romantic complications. But as they continued to work together, Rebecca sensed a shift in Jonathan's demeanor. There was a warmth and attentiveness in his interactions with her that went beyond friendship. She wasn't blind to his feelings, but she was hesitant. Her past experiences had taught her to be cautious with matters of the heart, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to open herself up again. In the years that followed, New Horizons expanded to cities across the Midwest, its programs gaining recognition for their comprehensive approach to addressing homelessness, unemployment, and addiction. Rebecca's nonprofit was no longer just a small grassroots organization. It had become a model for similar initiatives nationwide. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraising event, Jonathan and Rebecca found themselves alone in the office, surrounded by congratulatory flowers and thank you cards from people whose lives had been changed by their work. "I can't believe how far we've come," Rebecca said, looking around at the celebration's remnants. Jonathan smiled, a sense of pride swelling within him. "You've done something incredible, Rebecca. I hope you realize that." She turned to him, her expression sincere. "We did it together," she replied. "I couldn't have done this without you." There was a moment of silence as they looked at each other, the unspoken feelings lingering in the air. Jonathan took a step closer. "Rebecca, I don't want to make things complicated," he began, his voice steady but soft. "But I need you to know that I care about you. more than just as a friend. Rebecca's heart raced. She had sensed this moment coming for a long time but hadn't been sure how she would respond. "Jonathan," she said, taking a breath, "I care about you too. I don't know if I'm ready for anything more than what we have right now." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I understand," he said gently. "I just wanted to be honest. No matter what, I'll always be here to support you." As time went on, Rebecca and Jonathan continued their work, the connection between them remaining close, though they never fully crossed the line into romance. They had found a unique partnership, one that thrived on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the impact they were making together. And that was enough for them. Rebecca's past, with all its pain and loss, had shaped the woman she had become. She had found a way to channel her grief into something meaningful, helping countless others along the way. And while she would always carry the memory of James with her, she had learned to live fully, embracing the new path that life had offered her. Tom, too, had found redemption in his own way. Though he could never undo the harm he had caused, he dedicated his life to helping others avoid the same mistakes, finding purpose in the work that had once saved him. In the end, the $100 that Jonathan had given Rebecca on that fateful day had indeed changed lives. Not just hers, but many others as well. It had set off a chain of events that led to healing, forgiveness, and hope, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward to touch the lives of many. And as Rebecca stood on the stage at the opening of New Horizons' new national headquarters, she looked out at the audience. A diverse crowd of former clients, staff, and supporters. Knowing that the journey was far from over, it was only the beginning of a legacy that would continue to grow, one story at a time. As New Horizons expanded into a nationwide organization, new challenges arose. With growth came bureaucracy, funding pressures, and the inevitable scrutiny from the public and media. Rebecca found herself spending more time in meetings with city officials, philanthropists, and other nonprofit leaders than with the people her organization was meant to serve. She missed the personal interactions that had driven her to start this journey, the stories of individuals like herself who had struggled and found a second chance. Jonathan, now serving as the chairman of the board, also felt the weight of the organization's expansion. There were disagreements among the board members about the direction they should take. Some wanted to focus solely on homelessness, while others pushed for broader programs like mental health services, addiction treatment, and educational outreach. Jonathan knew that Rebecca's vision encompassed all these areas, but the realities of budgeting and scaling made it difficult to keep everyone aligned. During this time, Rebecca met Alicia, a young woman who had recently come to New Horizons for help. Alicia was in her early 20s, with bright eyes that hinted at her inner strength but a guardedness that spoke of deep wounds. She had aged out of the foster care system and had struggled to find stability ever since. For a while, she had managed to hold down a job, but an injury had left her unable to work, and without a safety net, she quickly found herself on the streets. Rebecca took a personal interest in Alicia, seeing in her a spark of determination similar to what she had once felt in herself. Alicia began attending life skills classes at New Horizons, and over time, she opened up to Rebecca about her past. She spoke of the neglect and abuse she had endured in the foster care system, her struggle with anxiety, and her fear that she would never be able to build a life for herself. But with the support of New Horizons, Alicia started to turn things around. She completed a vocational training program, secured a job in an administrative role at a local hospital, and found a small apartment. Her progress was remarkable, and it reminded Rebecca of the early days of her own journey, when even the smallest victories had felt monumental. Seeing Alicia's transformation reaffirmed Rebecca's belief in the importance of keeping a personal connection to the people her organization served. It wasn't just about programs and services. It was about hope, relationships, and the belief that everyone deserved a second chance. Despite the success stories, there were still significant obstacles. The larger New Horizons grew, the harder it became to maintain the close-knit, community-driven approach that had made it so effective in the beginning. Some staff members felt overwhelmed by the caseloads and the pressure to meet grant requirements. There was tension between the original team, who had been there since the early days, and the newer employees who brought different perspectives and ideas. Rebecca felt the strain. She had always been a hands-on leader, but as the demands on her time increased, she struggled to balance the administrative responsibilities with her desire to connect with people like Alicia. She also found herself at odds with certain board members who questioned the cost-effectiveness of expanding certain programs, particularly those related to addiction treatment and mental health. Jonathan, too, was feeling the pressure. He had invested more than just money into New Horizons. His heart and soul were tied up in its success. But he was beginning to realize that scaling an organization while maintaining its original vision was more complex than he had anticipated. He often found himself acting as a mediator between Rebecca and the board, trying to bridge the gap between the organization's growth aspirations and its founding values. One evening, after a particularly contentious board meeting, Rebecca and Jonathan went for a walk along the lakefront, where they often found themselves when they needed to clear their heads. "I feel like I'm losing sight of why I started this," Rebecca admitted, her voice laced with frustration. "We've become so focused on metrics and fundraising that sometimes I wonder if we're really helping people the way we used to." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "It's a natural part of growth," he said. "But I understand what you mean. I think we need to find a way to scale without losing the essence of what made New Horizons special. Maybe we could revisit some of the original programs that focus more on individual stories and less on numbers." Rebecca gave a small, weary smile. "I miss those early days," she said, "when we could just sit down with someone and listen to their story. I don't want us to lose that." Jonathan took her hand gently, his touch reassuring. "We won't," he promised. "We'll find a way to keep that spirit alive. It's what brought us here in the first place." Inspired by their conversation, Rebecca proposed a new initiative at New Horizons called the Story Circle. The idea was simple: to create a space where clients, staff, and volunteers could come together to share their stories in a supportive, judgment-free environment. The goal was to foster empathy, understanding, and connection within the community, reminding everyone that the work they were doing was not just about services but about changing lives. The Story Circle became a monthly event, with participants gathering in a large room at the organization's headquarters. There was no formal agenda. Anyone who wished to share could speak, and others would listen. Some stories were heartbreaking, detailing struggles with addiction, loss, and mental illness. Others were stories of triumph and resilience. People finding employment, reconnecting with estranged family members, or overcoming personal challenges. The initiative had a profound impact. It helped staff members reconnect with the mission, gave clients a voice in the organization's direction, and even drew attention from the media, leading to increased support from the community. For Rebecca, it was a way to ensure that even as New Horizons grew, it would always remain grounded in the human connections that had sparked its founding. Over time, the bond between Rebecca and Jonathan grew stronger, evolving into a deep friendship with the possibility of something more. They had shared so much: grief, hope, and a commitment to making a difference. One evening, after a particularly moving story circle, Jonathan invited Rebecca to dinner. There, amidst the quiet ambience of a small restaurant, he finally spoke the words he had been holding back for years. "Rebecca, I know we've built something incredible together," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I know we've both had our reasons for keeping things as they are. But I also know that I've fallen in love with you. I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for, but I needed to tell you how I feel." Rebecca's eyes met his, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She felt the weight of his words, the sincerity in his gaze. She had suspected his feelings for a long time, and part of her had felt the same way. But the fears of the past, the pain of losing James, the challenges of opening her heart again, had always held her back. "I care about you, Jonathan," she said softly, "more than I can express. But I'm still afraid. Afraid of losing what we have. Afraid of getting hurt." Jonathan reached across the table and took her hand. "I understand," he said gently. "We can take this as slowly as you need. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you, as your friend and partner." Rebecca gave him a small, grateful smile. Maybe, maybe it's time for me to take a chance, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I've spent so long being afraid to move forward in that way. But if I'm ever going to do it, I'd rather it be with you. Rebecca and Jonathan's relationship grew, evolving from friendship to something deeper. It was not without its challenges, but the bond they had formed over the years provided a solid foundation. They continued to lead new horizons together, finding new ways to balance their personal and professional lives while staying true to the organization's mission. Their journey reminded them that love, like life, was filled with unexpected turns. And while the future was uncertain, they faced it with hope, knowing that the path they had taken together had made a difference not just in their own lives, but in the lives of countless others. In the end, the impact of New Horizons was far greater than either of them had imagined when they first crossed paths on that Chicago street so many years ago. It was a legacy built on resilience, compassion, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance, even when the road to redemption is long and winding. And as Rebecca stood once more at James's grave, she whispered a quiet thank you. For it was through the heartbreak and loss that she had found her true calling, and in helping others, she had also found herself. With New Horizons now recognized as one of the most impactful nonprofits in the Midwest, Rebecca and Jonathan faced the challenge of maintaining the organization's original mission while adapting to the changing landscape of social work. As the organization expanded into new cities, they began receiving requests from government agencies and other nonprofits to partner on initiatives, ranging from affordable housing projects to mental health crisis intervention. The growing recognition was both a blessing and a burden. New Horizons was no longer just a grassroots effort. It had become a powerful voice in policy discussions and social reform. However, this came with new pressures, meeting the expectations of government partners, ensuring compliance with regulations, and addressing the increased demand for services. Rebecca found herself navigating a world she was never entirely prepared for. One filled with political negotiations, public appearances, and endless meetings with bureaucrats. She often longed for the simpler days when New Horizons was just a small shelter in downtown Chicago, but she understood that the organization's growth allowed them to help more people than ever before. Jonathan, who had a natural aptitude for strategic planning, thrived in this environment. His business background gave him the skills to manage the complexity of the organization's expansion, but he was careful to keep Rebecca involved in every decision. He knew how much New Horizons meant to her, and he didn't want to risk losing the personal touch that made it so unique. One of the new initiatives New Horizons launched was called Youth on the Rise, a program aimed at helping young people who were aging out of the foster care system or struggling with homelessness. The program provided not only housing and job training but also mentorship, life skills classes, and opportunities for higher education. The program was inspired in part by Alicia's story. Now a thriving young adult, Alicia had become a prominent advocate for foster youth and often spoke at New Horizons events. She worked closely with Rebecca to shape the program, drawing on her own experiences to help design services that could make a real difference for young people facing similar challenges. Youth on the Rise became one of the most successful initiatives of New Horizons, receiving praise from city officials and social workers alike. It also brought new faces into Rebecca's life. Young people like Marcus, a teenager who had spent most of his life in group homes and struggled with feelings of abandonment. Marcus was 17 when he first walked into New Horizons, carrying a small backpack that contained everything he owned. He was withdrawn and distrustful at first, having learned the hard way not to rely on anyone but himself. But through the program, and with the encouragement of his mentor Alicia, he slowly began to open up. Rebecca saw in Marcus a reflection of her own journey. She understood the fear of letting people in, the struggle to believe that a different life was possible. She spent time with him during the story circle sessions, listening to his stories, sharing her own experiences, and offering support. Over time, Marcus made progress. He completed a vocational training program in auto repair and found a job at a local mechanic shop. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when he was tempted to give up, but with the support of New Horizons and the community it had built, he kept moving forward. As New Horizons continued to grow, not everyone was pleased with the direction the organization was taking. Some longtime staff members worried that the increasing focus on partnerships with government agencies would dilute the organization's mission. They feared that New Horizons would become too bureaucratic, losing the grassroots spirit that had made it special. Rebecca faced criticism from some within her own team, who argued that she was spending too much time on expansion efforts and not enough on the day-to-day work of the organization. The concerns hit home for her, as she had always valued the personal connections she built with the people New Horizons served. Jonathan, sensing the tension, suggested a retreat for the leadership team to refocus on the organization's core values. They gathered at a quiet retreat center outside the city, away from the demands of daily operations. For 3 days, they engaged in discussions about the future of New Horizons, revisiting the mission statement and brainstorming ways to balance growth with maintaining their original spirit. Rebecca used this opportunity to reconnect with the team, sharing stories of her own experiences and listening to their concerns. She acknowledged that they were right. She had become too focused on the big picture at times, and it was important to find ways to stay grounded. The retreat ended with a renewed sense of purpose. The team decided to establish a new initiative called Community Days, where staff members, including Rebecca and Jonathan, would regularly volunteer at local shelters, food banks, and street outreach programs to stay connected with the people they served. This helped reinforce the culture of empathy and grassroots engagement that had always defined New Horizons. As Rebecca and Jonathan continued to navigate their evolving relationship, there were moments of uncertainty. They had grown closer over the years, but balancing a romantic relationship with their professional partnership was not without its challenges. There were times when they disagreed on decisions for the organization, and it wasn't always easy to separate those disagreements from their personal lives. One evening, after a heated discussion about the allocation of resources for a new mental health program, Rebecca found herself feeling frustrated and conflicted. She knew that Jonathan had a valid point. There were budget constraints to consider, but she also felt strongly that they needed to expand mental health services for the youth they worked with. "I'm not saying we shouldn't do it," Jonathan said, trying to soften his tone. "I'm just saying we need to make sure we can afford it without compromising other programs." Rebecca sighed. "I know," she said quietly. I feel like we're always having to make these trade-offs. It's hard when you see the need right in front of you and know you can't help everyone." Jonathan reached for her hand. "We're doing the best we can," he said gently. "And we're making a difference. We just have to remember why we're doing this in the first place." Rebecca squeezed his hand, appreciating his reassurance. "I know," she said. "I'm just tired. It feels like there's always more to do." Despite the challenges, their relationship continued to grow stronger. They found ways to support each other, both in their work and in their personal lives. When they finally decided to move in together, it felt like a natural progression, a step they had been building toward for a long time. As New Horizons expanded its reach, it became increasingly involved in addressing the opioid crisis, which was affecting communities across the country. The organization launched a pilot program in partnership with local health agencies, offering harm reduction services, addiction counseling, and support groups for families affected by substance use disorders. The program was both rewarding and heartbreaking. Rebecca met parents who had lost children to overdoses, young people struggling with addiction, and individuals who had been in and out of recovery for years. She saw firsthand the devastation the crisis was causing, and it fueled her determination to do more. But the program also faced backlash from some community members who were skeptical of harm reduction strategies, such as needle exchange programs and safe consumption spaces. There were heated debates at city council meetings, and New Horizons faced criticism from certain groups who argued that these initiatives enabled drug use rather than addressing the root causes. Jonathan, ever the strategist, worked behind the scenes to build support for the program, meeting with local leaders, health experts, and advocates to explain the benefits of harm reduction. He believed that, with the right approach, they could change the narrative and demonstrate that these services were saving lives. Rebecca, meanwhile, focused on telling the stories of the people who had benefited from the program. She invited them to speak at public events, sharing their experiences of recovery and the impact that New Horizons had on their lives. These personal testimonies helped shift public opinion, showing that addiction was a complex issue that required compassion and evidence-based solutions. As New Horizons prepared to celebrate its 20th anniversary, Rebecca and Jonathan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The organization had grown far beyond what they could have imagined when they first met on that cold Chicago morning so many years ago. They had faced countless challenges, experienced moments of doubt, and made difficult decisions, but through it all, they had stayed true to their mission. The anniversary event was held at a large community center, with hundreds of guests in attendance, including former clients, staff members, volunteers, and supporters. Rebecca took the stage, looking out at the audience with a mixture of pride and humility. "I stand here today not because of anything I've done alone," she began, her voice steady, "but because of the countless people who believed in this vision, who shared their stories, and who gave us a chance to make a difference together." New Horizons is not just an organization. It's a community. It's a place where hope is real, where second chances are possible, and where we never stop believing in the power of compassion. Jonathan, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but feel a swell of emotion. He knew that the work would never be finished, that there would always be new challenges and more people to help. But standing there, surrounded by a community that had been built from one small act of kindness, he was reminded that sometimes, even the most improbable journeys could lead to extraordinary places. And as the crowd rose to its feet in applause, Rebecca and Jonathan exchanged a quiet smile, knowing that their story, like the work of New Horizons, was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning again. As New Horizons reached its 20th year, it began to feel the limits of its existing model. The nonprofit had grown significantly, with programs in multiple states and a strong reputation for addressing homelessness, addiction, and youth empowerment. However, there was a growing awareness that their efforts, while impactful, could not address the systemic issues that kept so many people trapped in cycles of poverty and despair. Rebecca found herself grappling with the realization that providing services was only one part of the solution. It wasn't enough to give people food, shelter, and training. They needed to challenge the larger structures that perpetuated inequality: affordable housing policies, healthcare accessibility, criminal justice reform. For the first time, Rebecca started to think of New Horizons not just as a service provider but as a potential force for broader social change. Jonathan was initially hesitant about shifting the focus toward advocacy and policy work. He worried that becoming more politically active might alienate some of their donors or complicate existing partnerships. However, he trusted Rebecca's instincts and agreed to explore the possibilities. Rebecca and Jonathan began to lay the groundwork for New Horizons' new advocacy arm, which they named the Change Initiative. The goal was to address the root causes of the issues they had been tackling for decades. The Change Initiative would engage in lobbying efforts, public education campaigns, and legal advocacy, targeting specific policies that directly affected the populations they served. These included advocating for tenant rights, pushing for criminal justice reform, and increasing funding for mental health services. To lead this new division, they recruited Claire Edwards, a well-respected social justice advocate with a background in law. Claire had worked on various high-profile cases involving tenant rights and discrimination and brought a wealth of experience in navigating the political landscape. Her arrival energized the team but also brought new challenges, as some within New Horizons were unsure about taking on such a significant shift in focus. "Change isn't easy," Claire said at her first staff meeting. "But if we truly want to help people, we need to fight for them on every front. Not just with programs, but with policies. We're going to make some people uncomfortable, but that's exactly why this work matters." As New Horizons embraced this new phase, Rebecca found herself struggling to reconcile the nonprofit's evolving mission with the hands-on work she loved. She had always thrived on personal connections and hearing people's stories firsthand. But now, much of her time was spent in meetings with policymakers, testifying at city council hearings, and discussing legislative strategies. The work was important, but she missed the more personal touch. The increased visibility also brought new criticism. Some detractors accused New Horizons of becoming too political, arguing that they should stick to providing services rather than lobbying for social change. Others questioned the organization's methods, suggesting that advocacy might distract from the core mission of helping people on a day-to-day basis. Rebecca confided in Jonathan during one of their late-night conversations. "I never wanted to lose sight of the people we're trying to help," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "I'm starting to feel like I'm more of a politician than a social worker." Jonathan, who had grown used to seeing Rebecca's unwavering determination, could sense the strain she was under. "You're still helping people," he reassured her, "just in a different way. And this kind of change takes time. You're fighting for the same things, just on a bigger scale." Rebecca nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She decided to take a step back from some of the more public-facing work, delegating more responsibilities to Claire. She returned to spending more time at New Horizons shelters and drop-in centers, reconnecting with clients and remembering why she had started this journey in the first place. The decision to focus on advocacy couldn't have come at a more critical time. A housing crisis was sweeping across the city, exacerbated by rising rents and gentrification. Entire neighborhoods were changing, and longtime residents found themselves priced out or forced into substandard living conditions. The number of people experiencing homelessness was increasing, and the shelters run by New Horizons were struggling to keep up with the demand. Rebecca and Claire saw this as an urgent call to action. They launched a new campaign advocating for stronger tenant protections and more affordable housing options. This included organizing rallies, speaking at town hall meetings, and even partnering with other nonprofits to file lawsuits against landlords accused of illegal evictions. The fight was difficult and often discouraging. Landlords' associations pushed back hard, lobbying against rent control measures and tenant protections. The media was divided, with some outlets supporting New Horizons' stance and others portraying the organization as overstepping its role. During one particularly heated city council meeting, where Rebecca spoke passionately about the need for stronger tenant protections, a landlord group representative interrupted her. "You're turning this city into a war zone for property owners," he declared. "If you make it impossible to make a profit, there won't be any housing left at all." Rebecca took a deep breath before responding. "We're not trying to make life hard for property owners," she said. "We're trying to make sure everyone has a place to call home. The real crisis here is that more and more families are being pushed out onto the streets. We can't afford to ignore that." Her words resonated with many, but the battle was far from over. The city council ultimately passed a modest tenant protection measure, but it fell short of what advocates like Rebecca had hoped for. As the struggles continued, Rebecca found herself at a personal crossroads. She had dedicated nearly 2 decades to New Horizons and was now wondering what her role should be in the years ahead. The fight for social justice was important, but she missed the one-on-one connections and the fulfillment that came from directly helping people. At the same time, her relationship with Jonathan had settled into a comfortable rhythm. They had become each other's anchor, providing support during the organization's most trying moments. Yet, Rebecca sensed a distance between them when it came to their future together. They had been so focused on their shared mission that they hadn't discussed where their relationship was heading. One night, as they sat together on their back porch, Rebecca brought up the subject. "Do you ever wonder if we're going to keep doing this forever?" she asked, looking up at the night sky. "Or if there's something else we should be thinking about?" Jonathan, taken aback, paused for a moment. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "We've built something incredible here, but I don't know if this has to be our whole lives. Maybe there's room for something more." Rebecca nodded. "I love what we've done with New Horizons, but I'm starting to think about what life looks like beyond it. Maybe it's time to think about passing the torch, letting others take the lead." The idea wasn't easy to entertain. New Horizons was their life's work, but the thought of stepping back, even just a little, opened up new possibilities they hadn't considered. After much reflection, Rebecca and Jonathan decided it was time to shift their roles within New Horizons. They began the process of transitioning some leadership responsibilities to the next generation, with Claire taking on a more prominent role as the public face of the organization. Rebecca stayed involved in the advocacy work but spent more time on personal projects, such as writing about her experiences and mentoring young leaders in the nonprofit sector. They also explored a new direction in their personal lives. For years, their relationship had been defined by the work they did together, but now they were starting to imagine a different kind of life. They took a much-needed vacation, something they hadn't done in years, traveling across the country and exploring the places they had always talked about but never had time to visit. The time away gave them space to think about what mattered most. They returned to Chicago with a renewed sense of purpose, not just for their work, but for each other. They decided to get married in a small, intimate ceremony, attended by close friends, family, and some of the people whose lives had been touched by New Horizons over the years. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, held in a park that overlooked the city skyline. As Rebecca and Jonathan exchanged vows, they reflected on the journey that had brought them together, from that fateful encounter on the street so many years ago to the life they had built through love, loss, and resilience. Rebecca and Jonathan's decision to step back didn't mean the end of their involvement with New Horizons. It meant a new chapter. They continued to support the organization from a distance, attending events and offering guidance, but they trusted the team they had built to carry on the mission. The Change Initiative continued to push for reforms, securing victories that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The Youth on the Rise program expanded to new cities, reaching even more young people who needed support. The organization's legacy grew, not just as a service provider, but as a catalyst for lasting social change. Rebecca often reflected on the power of a single act of kindness, the $100 Jonathan had given her so many years ago, and how it had set off a chain of events that changed not only her life but the lives of thousands. It was a reminder that even the smallest actions could lead to profound impact. As she looked forward to the future, Rebecca knew that while her time at the helm of New Horizons was coming to an end, her journey was far from over. There were still stories to tell, causes to champion, and lives to touch. And with Jonathan by her side, she was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that the path ahead was as full of possibility as the road behind. With Rebecca and Jonathan gradually stepping back from day-to-day operations, the leadership team at New Horizons continued to push the organization into new territories. Claire Edwards, now the executive director, was an ambitious and innovative leader, constantly looking for new ways to address the evolving needs of the community. Under her guidance, New Horizons launched new initiatives, including technology training programs, support for formerly incarcerated individuals, and expanded healthcare services. One of the new voices at New Horizons was Luis Rodriguez, a former high school teacher who had transitioned into social work. Luis had a knack for connecting with young people, especially those who had slipped through the cracks of the education system. He joined the organization to lead the Youth on the Rise program, determined to expand its reach and bring a fresh approach to engaging at-risk youth. Rebecca took a special interest in mentoring Luis, seeing in him the same passion and determination she had felt in her early days. They would often meet to discuss ideas, and Luis wasn't shy about pushing for bold initiatives. "Kids today are growing up in a different world," Luis said during one of their discussions. "We need to be more than just a safety net. We need to empower them to become advocates for their own futures." Rebecca admired his vision and encouraged him to experiment with new approaches. Luis piloted a youth leadership program that taught participants not only practical skills like resume writing and financial literacy, but also community organizing and public speaking. The goal was to help young people find their voice and advocate for the changes they wanted to see in their neighborhoods. Just as New Horizons began to see the fruits of its expansion efforts, a new crisis emerged: a surge in youth homelessness. The economic downturn had led to widespread job losses, and many young adults who were already on the edge fell into homelessness. Shelters across the city reached capacity, and there was an urgent need for additional resources. Rebecca, though no longer in a formal leadership role, couldn't stay on the sidelines. She worked closely with Luis to advocate for emergency funding and rapid rehousing initiatives aimed at young people. They coordinated with other organizations to create a citywide task force on youth homelessness, pooling resources to address the crisis more effectively. The situation brought back memories of Rebecca's own struggles during her darkest times, and she felt a renewed urgency in her efforts. She visited shelters, spoke at rallies, and met with city officials, channeling her passion into action. This period was a reminder of the ever-present need for new horizons, even as the organization evolved. One day, while visiting a temporary shelter set up for young people, Rebecca met a teenage girl named Kayla. She was 17, shy, and hesitant to talk. Over time, as Rebecca kept returning to the shelter, Kayla opened up about how she had ended up there. She had been living with her grandmother, who passed away suddenly, leaving her with no other family and nowhere to go. Rebecca saw a reflection of herself in Kayla's eyes, the fear, the uncertainty, but also a spark of resilience. She took Kayla under her wing, helping her find a more stable living situation and enrolling her in the Youth on the Rise program. Kayla quickly became one of the most active participants in the youth leadership workshops, surprising even herself with how much she enjoyed public speaking and community advocacy. As New Horizons faced these new challenges, Rebecca and Jonathan continued to adapt to their evolving roles within the organization. Their relationship had grown stronger since they decided to step back and explore life beyond the demands of the nonprofit. However, their involvement with New Horizons never completely ended. It remained a central part of their lives, something that had shaped their relationship and given it a unique depth. Rebecca had taken up writing as a new passion, documenting her experiences and the stories of those she had encountered through New Horizons. Her first book, Bridges We Build, Stories from the Margins, was a collection of narratives about people who had found hope through the organization's work. The book received praise for its authenticity and rawness, capturing the struggles and triumphs of individuals who had often been overlooked. Jonathan, on the other hand, began exploring new ways to use his business acumen to address social issues. He became involved in impact investing, supporting ventures that aimed to create sustainable social change. This included backing companies that developed affordable housing solutions, mental health technologies, and employment programs for underserved communities. His work took him around the country, but he always found time to return to Chicago and reconnect with the New Horizons family. Their decision to get married had brought a sense of peace to both of them. The ceremony had been small, but their commitment to each other felt profound, as if it had always been meant to happen. They were now considering starting a family of their own, discussing the idea of adoption as a way to continue their journey of helping others, but in a more personal and intimate way. Despite the organization's growth and the shift towards larger advocacy efforts, there were signs that some of the grassroots energy that had once fueled New Horizons was fading. Staff turnover was becoming a problem, and there were murmurs that some programs had lost the personal touch that had made them effective in the early days. Luis, who was still leading the Youth on the Rise program, noticed that some of the participants weren't fully engaging. They were attending workshops and completing the tasks, but there was a lack of enthusiasm that concerned him. He reached out to Rebecca, asking for her perspective. "I think we need to bring back more of the one-on-one mentorship," Luis said. "When I first started, I remember how much it meant to sit down with someone who really listened. I'm worried that as we've grown, we've lost some of that." Rebecca agreed and suggested a pilot program that paired young people with mentors from the local community. These mentors would not just be professionals but could include artists, musicians, and others who could connect with the youth on different levels. The idea was to foster authentic relationships that went beyond traditional career guidance, giving the participants a sense of belonging and purpose. The pilot program quickly gained traction, with mentors and youth alike embracing the deeper connections. It reinvigorated the energy within New Horizons and reminded everyone why the organization had been started in the first place: to bring people together, not just to provide services but to foster a real sense of community. As New Horizons continued to adapt and grow, its influence spread far beyond the city of Chicago. The organization's advocacy work began to gain national attention, with Claire Edwards frequently traveling to Washington, D.C., to testify on issues related to youth homelessness, tenant rights, and criminal justice reform. New Horizons had become a model for other nonprofits across the country, with its innovative programs and holistic approach being replicated in cities facing similar challenges. Kayla, the teenager Rebecca had met at the shelter, became one of the organization's most compelling voices. Now 20 years old and attending college with the help of a New Horizons scholarship, she spoke at public events about the impact the organization had on her life. Her story of transformation from a homeless teenager to a young leader inspired others, and she quickly became a youth advocate for the organization. But the growth of New Horizons wasn't just about its programs or advocacy efforts. It was about the lives it had touched and the people it had empowered. Luis's Youth Leadership Initiative produced a new wave of young activists who were passionate about creating change, and Rebecca's mentorship continued to inspire the next generation of social workers, advocates, and community leaders. As Rebecca reflected on her journey, she couldn't help but think back to that moment so many years ago when she was just a woman on the street with a cardboard sign and a broken spirit. That single act of kindness from Jonathan had set in motion a series of events that had not only changed her life, but had also helped transform the lives of thousands of others. She often wondered what James would have thought of everything that had happened. She still visited his grave from time to time, telling him about the latest developments at New Horizons, about the young people finding hope, and about the life she had built with Jonathan. There was a sense of peace in knowing that her grief had been turned into something meaningful, that she had found a way to carry James's memory forward by helping others. As she prepared to retire from her formal role at New Horizons, Rebecca planned to continue writing, mentoring, and speaking about the lessons she had learned. She wasn't stepping away from the work. She was simply finding new ways to do it, and she was leaving the organization in the hands of leaders like Claire, Luis, and Kayla, who carried the same fire and determination to keep pushing forward. The organization continued to evolve, with new leaders emerging and fresh ideas being implemented. The world kept changing, and so did the challenges that people faced. But New Horizons remained committed to its mission of providing hope, healing, and a path forward for anyone in need. Rebecca and Jonathan, now semi-retired, enjoyed their life together, finding fulfillment in their ongoing work and the new roles they had embraced as mentors, parents, and advocates. They had built a legacy not just of an organization but of a movement that believed in second chances and the power of community. As the years went on, the story of New Horizons would continue to unfold, written in the lives of the people who walked through its doors, spoke at its events, and took what they had learned to create change in their own communities. It was a story that would never truly end, because it lived on in every act of kindness, every step toward justice, and every bridge built between people who believed that a better world was possible. Rebecca and Jonathan's journey was proof that from the smallest gestures could come the greatest impacts, and that even the most ordinary of people could leave behind an extraordinary legacy. Years passed, and New Horizons found itself navigating a rapidly evolving world. The nonprofit sector was changing, with new approaches to social work, technology, and public engagement reshaping how organizations operated. As a respected and established organization, New Horizons was well-positioned to continue its mission, but it had to remain adaptive and innovative to meet new demands. Rebecca's decision to retire from her formal role came with mixed emotions. Although she had been preparing for this transition, it still felt bittersweet to step away from the organization that had been the center of her life for so long. Nevertheless, she knew it was time for fresh leadership to take New Horizons into the future. The board appointed Claire Edwards as the new CEO, and her ambitious vision for the organization included a stronger emphasis on digital outreach, data-driven services, and expanding partnerships with tech companies to improve access to resources. Claire's innovative strategies helped the organization modernize, but they also raised important questions about balancing the personal touch that had always been New Horizons' hallmark. Rebecca continued to mentor Claire and other young leaders, sharing her insights and reminding them of the importance of the human element in their work. She also encouraged the staff to maintain programs that brought people together in person, such as the Story Circle, which had remained a cornerstone of the organization's culture. As New Horizons adapted to new challenges, it also embraced the opportunities brought by emerging leaders. Among them was Jasmine Patel, a young social worker with a background in public health. Jasmine had joined the organization's healthcare services team, where she focused on integrating mental health support with primary care for people experiencing homelessness. Jasmine's approach was holistic and hands-on. She believed that treating mental health as an essential component of healthcare was key to breaking the cycles of homelessness and addiction. Her work involved outreach at shelters, clinics, and even on the streets, where she met people who were often hesitant to seek formal medical care. One of Jasmine's clients, a man named Samir, had been living on the streets for several years. He struggled with both substance abuse and untreated mental health issues, making it difficult for him to engage with traditional services. Jasmine met with him regularly, building a rapport and providing consistent care. Over time, Samir began to open up, eventually agreeing to enter a rehabilitation program facilitated by New Horizons. Rebecca took notice of Jasmine's dedication and asked her to speak at one of the Story Circle events. There, Jasmine shared not only Samir's progress but also the broader message of integrating mental health care with all aspects of social services. Her story inspired a renewed focus within the organization to prioritize holistic approaches, reminding everyone that healing often requires addressing both visible and invisible wounds. As part of Claire's modernization plan, New Horizons launched a digital platform that connected people in need with services more efficiently. The platform, named SafeReach, provided an online directory of shelters, food banks, healthcare services, and legal aid. It also featured a live chat where trained social workers could offer guidance and resources. While the platform made accessing services easier for many, it wasn't without controversy. Some staff members worried that the push for digital solutions would diminish face-to-face interactions. There were also concerns about privacy and the digital divide, as not all clients had access to smartphones or the internet. Luis, who had been a vocal advocate for maintaining the personal touch in New Horizons programs, voiced these concerns at a board meeting. "We can't lose sight of the fact that not everyone will benefit from a digital approach," he said. "There are still people out there who need someone to sit down with them and talk, face to face." Claire acknowledged Luis's concerns, and they worked together to ensure that the platform complemented, rather than replaced, in-person services. The organization expanded its outreach efforts, with staff members bringing tablets to shelters and drop-in centers, where they could help clients use SafeReach while still offering the option of direct support. After stepping back from her formal role, Rebecca found time to explore personal interests she had put on hold. Her passion for writing continued to grow, and she started work on a second book focused on the broader societal lessons she had learned through her years with New Horizons. Titled Breaking Barriers: Stories of Hope and Change, the book aimed to highlight not only individual experiences but also the systemic challenges that kept people marginalized. Jonathan, now more involved in impact investing than ever, began to focus on projects related to sustainable development. He was particularly interested in supporting affordable housing initiatives that integrated green technology to create environmentally friendly, low-cost homes. He had also started mentoring young entrepreneurs who wanted to launch social enterprises, seeing this as a way to create long-term positive change. Rebecca and Jonathan took time to travel together, visiting some of the places they had always talked about but never had the time to see. Their travels gave them a fresh perspective on life and an opportunity to connect with social causes beyond Chicago. They visited innovative social programs in cities across the world, learning from others and bringing back ideas that could help New Horizons continue evolving. The idea of adoption had remained on their minds, and after years of discussion, they decided to become foster parents. They welcomed a young boy named Alex into their home. He was 8 years old and had experienced significant trauma in his early years, leading to behavioral issues that had made it difficult for him to find a stable foster family. Rebecca and Jonathan embraced the challenge, drawing on their experiences at New Horizons to create a supportive, nurturing environment for Alex in the years following their semi-retirement. A national crisis emerged that once again called Rebecca and Jonathan back into action. A growing wave of homelessness and displacement caused by extreme weather events. As climate change accelerated, entire communities were affected by floods, hurricanes, and wildfires, displacing thousands of people and overwhelming shelters and social services. Rebecca, who had been planning to spend more time writing and fostering, felt a familiar pull to get involved. She joined a coalition of nonprofits working to address climate-related displacement, using her experience from New Horizons to advocate for policy changes and emergency housing solutions. She also saw an opportunity to bridge her past work with her new passion for writing by using her platform to raise awareness about the intersection of climate change and social justice. New Horizons responded to the crisis by launching a new program called Safe Havens, which aimed to provide emergency shelter and relocation assistance for people displaced by natural disasters. The program quickly became a key part of the organization's services, working with government agencies and other nonprofits to create a coordinated response to the growing problem. Jonathan, with his background in sustainable development, collaborated with Safe Havens to incorporate eco-friendly designs in temporary housing and develop long-term affordable housing projects for displaced families. His work focused on creating communities that were not only resilient but also empowered, with access to social services, education, and employment opportunities. Meanwhile, Kayla, the young woman Rebecca had mentored years earlier, continued to play a prominent role in New Horizons. Now in her late 20s, she had become an outspoken advocate for homeless youth, leading programs and helping design outreach strategies for young people affected by the climate crisis. Kayla's journey had come full circle when she took over the Youth on the Rise program from Luis, who moved on to start his own nonprofit focused on education reform. Under Kayla's leadership, the program expanded to include training in climate resilience, teaching young people skills like sustainable farming, disaster preparedness, and environmental advocacy. Rebecca watched Kayla's growth with pride, seeing her not only as a mentee but as a leader in her own right. At a celebration marking the 25th anniversary of New Horizons, Rebecca introduced Kayla as the keynote speaker. Kayla's speech reflected on her own experience of finding hope through the organization and the power of paying that hope forward. "We live in a world that often tells us what we can't do, what we don't deserve," Kayla said to the audience. "But New Horizons taught me to believe in what we can do, to strive for what we all deserve. A place to call home, a chance to learn, a future worth fighting for." Her words resonated deeply with Rebecca, reminding her of the first days when she had struggled to find a purpose beyond her grief. Now, she saw the legacy of New Horizons not just in the organization itself, but in the people who had come through its doors, grown, and gone on to make a difference in the world. As Rebecca and Jonathan continued their journey, they remained dedicated to supporting New Horizons in whatever ways they could, even if they were no longer the driving force behind the day-to-day operations. They found fulfillment in their roles as mentors, foster parents, and advocates for social change, while also embracing the joys of life beyond the demands of their careers. The future of New Horizons was bright, with leaders like Claire, Jasmine, and Kayla bringing new energy and perspectives to the mission. The organization continued to evolve in response to the challenges of the times, never losing sight of its original purpose: to provide hope, healing, and a path forward for anyone who needed it. The legacy Rebecca and Jonathan had built was one of compassion, resilience, and transformation. It wasn't just about the programs or the policies. It was about the people, the thousands of lives that had been touched, changed, and empowered through the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. And as Rebecca stood on the stage one last time at a New Horizons event, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a moment of desperation on a cold Chicago street to a life filled with purpose and love. Her story, Jonathan's story, and the stories of countless others would live on through the work of the organization, carried forward by the next generation of leaders who had taken up the mantle. It was a reminder that while the fight for a better world is never truly over, each step forward is a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of community, and the belief that change is always possible. The work of New Horizons would continue, but for Rebecca and Jonathan, a new chapter was about to begin, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of all the possibilities still ahead.